Good and long. Detailed visual inspection is not looking at it for a long time. You can stare at it with glassed over eyes and it doesn't mean you did a detailed visual inspection. So maybe measuring, although not always. What is detailed visual inspection? Might use a mirror. That technically is kind of getting into remote visual inspection, but it's kind of used so often that it's not really. What else? What are you looking for? What are you noticing? Anything obvious? Details? Okay. What about, yeah, something that maybe is different, right? You don't want to get complacent and miss something that maybe changed because you've seen the same thing 1,000 times. You don't want to miss something that's come up that 1,000 time number 1,001. Nonconformity. Okay. So we do detailed visual inspection all the time. You're going to have to do that with every single part for every single method that you're doing in NDT. Remote visual inspection is taking that and using tools to be able to see inside of things, to see around obstructions, to essentially help your vision get into areas that maybe you can't see just by walking up to a part. Or maybe for detailed visual inspection you remove panels. Sometimes you don't want to have to remove panels, or sometimes you can't remove parts. Right? Think about an engine on wing. You can do a detailed visual inspection of the combustion liner by taking that engine apart, but you don't want to take that engine apart every time you have to check the combustion liner. So you have an ability to use a scope like we've got here, remote visual inspection, in order to see inside of the engine or see the compressor sections or see the turbine sections without having to take that engine off wing, take it apart. The other spot these are nice is if you drop some hardware somewhere and you're trying to figure out where it is. You drop a piece of hardware behind a circuit breaker panel when you're trying to hook up a wire and you hear the plinko going on, but you don't want to have to pull every circuit breaker, every panel to try to find it. Sometimes you can snake a scope in there. Make sure power's off before you do. You don't want to turn the scope into a short circuit. That wouldn't be good, but things like that, or if you drop hardware into an inspection panel or something. So we use it for non-destructive testing. It's also can be a useful tool when you're trying to look into tight areas or areas that aren't easy to access. We've got three main types we're going to use. So the first one is a borescope, and I've got examples of each of these here. So on the end here, I have a borescope. The next one is a fiberscope, and I've got one of those here in the middle. I'm going to get this one kind of uncaught from its case. We should have done. So we have a fiberscope right here that is still strapped in. Go. There's our fiberscope. Okay. And then the last one that I've got here is videoscope, and this is a videoscope here. And we will look at how that operates and what that does. Okay. So borescopes, the main points with them is they typically are rigid. So this is a rigid borescope. It's a rigid metal tube that's going to basically transfer an image from the end back to your eye over here. So various diameters and different lengths. This one, you can see diameter. This is actually kind of a thicker borescope. It's a little heavier duty one. But they can come in different lengths to reach into different areas, different angles of view. This one, the lens on the end is kind of looking straight ahead, but you have some that look up, some that look back. We'll look at what those different angles are. This one's kind of neat. It's actually got a sleeve that can go over it. And now instead of looking straight ahead, it looks up. So it gives it a little more adaptability. Now, the downside is when you put this sleeve on, it makes it a little bit larger diameter, so it's not going to fit in as small of a space. They use things like relay lenses, and I have relay lenses, but it can also be things like relay lenses, prisms, and mirrors to relay or bring that image from one end to the other. Some also use fiber optic cable, although not too often because fiber optic cables don't have as good of resolution, and they tend to be more expensive. They're flexible, so we'll use them in some of the other scopes, but you really don't need that flexibility in a borescope, a rigid borescope. And then the lighting can be either through a fiber optic bundle or an LED. Most of your newer ones are LEDs. Some of the older ones are going to be fiber optic bundle, and that's what this one that I have here uses. So I'm going to pull this off. So You may, or I don't know if you guys can see on the end, there's kind of a circle in the middle, and then there's a ring around the outside of it. The circle in the middle is a lens. That's where we're looking out of. That ring around the outside are the ends of fiber optic cables that allow us to provide light. And so that's what I got in my hand here is a fiber optic cable. So to set this up, one end of this, the short end, snaps on there. This is a fiber optic input here. The other end, now this one is the ITI scope we have here. So you can see this. This is our light source, this blue box here, and this gray box is the light source for the fiber scope. This slides in, and it doesn't go in very far. You'd think it'd go in further, but it really only goes in that 1/4, 3/8 of an inch on the end there. And so when you have that plugged in, and we turn this on, you can see it lit up in there. We have a halogen bulb inside of here. That now the light, I know it's pretty bright even at a distance, right? Let me turn it down a bit. There we go, that's not too bad. That allows us to light up the area that we're looking into. Now the bulb is always bright. When I change the intensity of it, all I'm doing, there's a shutter in there that opens or closes, adjusting the amount of light being sent into the fiber optic cable. Okay, so it allows us to see, and then we can look through the other end. We'll turn it down. And I can see you guys all sitting there. I see Spencer, I see Manny, I see Oscar, I see Keaton, right? Okay. We'll talk about magnification a little bit later on. It does both. Kind of depends on where you are in relation to what's called the focal length of the lens. So if you're inside the focal length, it magnifies. If you're outside it actually makes you look smaller. Okay. So this one uses a fiber optic light source. Some of them have an LED in the end with an electrical, they're electrical or even battery operated. Okay. Old ones too may have even had a little bulb in the end. We have a couple that are real old school that have a little tiny peanut bulb in the end, and they had like a little battery pack that went on them. They don't work anymore. I've got them so you can kind of see them, but in industry, you don't really see those too much anymore. Okay. They do have a halogen bulb in here. Halogen bulbs do not like being turned on an awful lot. So like right now, I've got it on. You don't want to be turning it on and off and on and off. If you're using it, turn it on, leave it on. Okay, when you're done, shut it off, and then ideally you allow the bulb to cool before you turn it back on again. It's kind of like the projectors that won't turn back on again right away. The old school ones. The newer ones I think are good. So I'm going to shut it off now just because I have it on. I showed you how it works. When we're done, there'll be enough time for the bulb to cool before the end of lecture, and you can come up and kind of play with it. The next one is our fiber scope, and so the borescope, where it's rigid, the fiber scope is flexible. It allows us to get into more areas. And this one has a permanently attached fiber optic cable for light transmission. And this one does slide in all the way. But then the scope itself, the image is also transmitted using fiber optics. Okay, so there is, and again, when you look at this later, you'll see there's a circular kind of dot at the end. That is the lens for that's the what's called the objective lens for the image. And then there's kind of a half moon shape. That's the end of the fiber optics. And so this works the same way. I turn power on, we'll get a light. It has the ability to adjust the intensity because, think about if you're looking into like a metal object and you turn this thing up really bright, that light will reflect back at you, and it can cause you to get like black spots in your vision. You don't want to be trying to inspect things when you got a bunch of black spots in your vision. You get flashed by it. But you can see I can adjust the brightness of the light on this one as well. Turn down, yep, you probably got black spots in your vision now. Turn down low. And this one does have an eye cup that you put over it just to shield light out. There is an eye cup for this one too. I just didn't put it on yet. But this is it's a fiber scope, so it's got two sets of fiber optics in here. One is taking light from our light source through this cable down all the way to the tip and out, and then you've got an image bundle that is running back up and to the eyepiece. And this one is also what's called articulated. So I have the ability, there's a little trigger here I can move to Bring it back and forth. And this is a two-way articulated. It can go left and right or up and down, depending on which way you put it. Okay. There is another trigger that I've removed, which is a lock. So if you move this and put this trigger to the lock position, it will stay this way. Any ideas why I've removed it? Because students go to pull it out without releasing the lock, and then they damage the tip of the scope. So there's no lock on it, so that now, if you go to pull it out, it will be able to straighten back out. So that's why the lock is removed, because I've had too many students damage the end. This one is shorter than it was when we originally bought it. As the ends have been damaged, we send it into Olympus. They have to cut the end off, put a new articulated end on it. It actually does have some damage. You can see about 3/4 of the way down. And when you look through it, you will see dead pixels in you'll have fibers that are broken in there. So there's little black spots. Those are the fibers that got damaged when this got pinched right here. Okay. It still has the majority of them working. And, if we put a new tip on it right here, it'd be really short and pretty useless. Okay, but that's a fiber scope. Fiber optic bundles transmit the image to the eyepiece. Lighting in this case is another halogen bulb, but newer ones, some of them are going to have LED at the end where there's wires running up to power it. I don't think there's any where they have like a little bulb in the tip as much. That's kind of big. You can see this one's a lot skinnier than the borescope, fit in small areas. With this, the other thing we have, and we keep them in the case with the video scope, is I do have different pieces of essentially just aluminum tubing. And so if you're trying to get the fiber scope, or when we talk about the video scope, which is flexible, into a certain area, you can kind of treat it as a rigid borescope by running it through a piece of tubing, right? If you stick that articulated end out, now please don't have the end inside and try to articulate it. You want to have it behind. Yeah. You can get it into areas or use it to get, from like a front chamber to a back chamber, to get further in. Or you even can have tubes that are bent in certain directions to try to access certain areas. So when we put this in, now it comes out like this. Say I put it into a hole, and if I bend it that way, I can almost look back towards where I put it. I can rotate it in here, which is kind of hard to do this. Sometimes having a couple people is nice. There we go. See, I can look back the direction that I'm coming from, or something like that. Okay. So, you can use tubes like that in order to increase the versatility. So we've got a few of these in here. If you want to bend one up in class, if you decide you need one, I think someone bent this one up last year. Let me know. I can help you with it. You just got to be careful not to collapse the bent portion too much where the scope will get stuck or won't fit through. You can't make a real sharp bend. Okay. So again, we'll have that for you to kind of play with when it's done, but I'm going to want to let that fully cool before I turn it back on again. The last one we have here is a video scope, and this is, now we have a camera, which can be what's called a CCD or CMOS chip in the tip of it, and it produces a video signal. Same type of chip you have in your cell phone camera or digital camera. It's basically a digital camera at the end of the thing. So this is our display head right here. We have the control head here, and then we have the end of ours, which has a camera, and in this case has a little LED at the end of a light emitting diode. Okay. This one is battery operated. The batteries have a charge indicator. So that's a full charge battery. It's got black dots all the way across. To power it up, in the back of the display, there's a door you open. In here, you'll see there is a memory stick as well. So you can take pictures with this and then transfer them to a computer or whatnot. So we'll keep that in there. Yep. Battery in. Now I can power it up. To power it up, you press and hold the power button on the display head for a second. Okay. And now you can see an image on here instead of having to look through a little eyepiece. And this one is what's called four-way articulated. So the tip can go down and up and left and right. And what that allows me to do is be able to go pretty much any direction I want with a little joystick here. See yourselves? This one does have a lock trigger on it. So if I move it and I pull the little trigger by my pointer finger, it will stay in the position it's in. Please do not try to remove it and damage the tip on it, okay? Make sure you release that trigger so it goes straight. And you can tell, you can see if I hold it in the down position, lock it, you can see that thumb control is staying in the lock position. I release it and it goes back to the center. So just make sure that's centered before you try to remove the scope from anything you're using it. Other things you have on here, I can control the brightness with my thumb. On down. I turn that little light on off. I can actually turn the light on and off altogether right here if I want. Okay. It does have a little bit of a digital zoom on it. Okay. And then I can also freeze the screen like that. And there's a freeze on the right and the left. So if you're left-handed, if you're using it with your left hand, you have the same controls on both sides. Okay. I'm right-handed. I tend to hold the control head in my right hand and the camera in my left. If I press it again, it goes away. If I press it to freeze and then press and hold, you can see it does that. That just took a picture. So now there's a picture on there. But just know that when you freeze the screen, it does not automatically take a picture. You have to press and hold a second time to actually get it to take a picture. I've had students do their entire lab like, okay, I took a picture, took a picture, took a picture, took a picture, they got done, and there were no pictures on there. Okay, so just know when you've got, it says FRZ on top, that means a short press is gonna freeze it. REC on the bottom for record, press and hold to record. There are newer versions, like the more expensive, bigger ones, these, they can do video as well. Ours just does still frames, okay? It's also got a menu button to be able to adjust. If I view, if I short press, allows me to cycle through my different pictures, right? You can see there's some in there from some different engine parts and stuff. These are from last year. I got to wipe those out. If I press and hold, trying to look over, I've got a menu. I can delete them and stuff like that. If I'm in live mode, if I press and hold, I can adjust different parameters of the scope. Okay, and it's all controlled with the up, down, and up, down over here, and then pressing this button. The joystick only does the articulation. Okay, so transmits light or image to a video like that. Get out of that menu. Okay, now I got to get out of here. There we go. Okay. Okay. That one, because it's LED, you can turn it on and off as much as you want. It's not going to hurt anything. I'm just going to leave it on because it does take a sec. Well, to turn it off, you have to press and hold the power button for like 2 seconds, and it'll shut off. Okay. So that one will be up here. Oh, no. You can play with it when we're done with the lecture here as well. Okay. So you'll need to use you'll use all of them at some point or another during the course of your lab. Sometimes you may even use more than one. Okay, conducting a lab. I have had students with the, with the video scope, you can take pictures, right, and save them. With the borescope and the fiberscope, I have had students successfully, if you put your phone camera right up to the eyepiece, you can oftentimes get it to focus, and you can take a picture with that, where it's just you have a black circle or a circle image with black around it or something like that. So sometimes you can get your phone camera to work with them too if you want to take a picture through them. Otherwise, you can always sketch what you see in your lab reports. Uh-oh. No. Oh, there it goes. So the various parts of the scope there's some nomenclature you need to know. So I'm going to grab the borescope. That's the easiest one. These apply for the fiber scope and the video scope as well. Okay. Oh, to remove these, grab the collar and just pull. This one doesn't remove from here, you just pull. But if I hold the scope up here, where you can see the different parts, I have my what's called distal end over here, okay? Some ways to kind of remember these. The distal end is the furthest distance from your eye, okay? Furthest distance from your eye. And contained in the distal end is the objective lens, the lens that's closest to the object you're looking at, okay? Objective lens. The length where the scope is the same diameter is called the working length. So if I were to insert this into an opening that's just a hair bigger than the diameter, I can insert it up to this point right here, right before it gets bigger, and I wouldn't be able. So this is called the working length from right here to right here. Is it shown on there? L sub W. The working diameter is the diameter of the scope itself. And again, this applies so on like the video scope, the working length is from the tip of this to the point right here where it starts to flare out. So you can see it's almost, what, about 4.5 feet long or so. The working diameter, you can see this is much skinnier than the borescope. Okay. And then at the opposite end, what's called the diopter. Diopter goes near your eye. Diopter, right? You have the eyepiece, okay? And you have a focal ring. We'll look at that on the next. The last thing on here that's really important, and that a lot of people, there's overall length, the whole length of the scope. That's not really that important, but I mean, it's there. These two here, what's called the angle of view and the field of view, are what trip students up probably more than anything else when they're looking at a scope. All three of the scopes I have here, if you look at the center line of the scope, if you look at the center line of the scope, if you look at the center line of the fiberscope, which direction am I looking? Looking straight ahead. That is a 0-degree angle of view. Okay? Angle of view is from the center line of the scope to whichever way it's pointing. What is the scope up here on the board? What is the angle of view? It's a 90-degree angle of view scope. Some scopes might be 60 degrees where they kind of look forward. Some might be 120 degrees where they look back. Okay? And there's names for those we'll get into, like oblique and forward looking. This one, for instance, when you put the sleeve on, now I'm looking up or looking that way, right? This is now it's become, this is a 90-degree sleeve. It's still a 0-degree angle of view scope. Okay, but it does have this 90-degree sleeve that allows you to look 90 degrees from the center line of the scope. Okay. So that's angle of view, is which way, compared to the center line of the scope, which way are you going to see? Okay. Field of view, you can all experience by doing this. Everyone take your hands, put them up on each side of your head, just outside your eyes. Okay. The field of view is the degrees from one side to the other. So a wide field of view is when you flare your hands out. A narrow field of view is when you go like this. So a wide field of view, narrow field of view, right? Okay. So field of view is how far of an area you're going to see. Different scopes are going to have a different field of view. This one, top of my head, I want to say is about a 30-degree. That one's like a 50-something degree. I can't remember all of them. You're going to figure that out in the lab. Part of your lab is like figuring out what the angle of view and field of view of each scope is. Okay. The other thing here, there is a tip length that this has a tip length when you don't have the sleeve on. This is a tip length of 0. It's the distance from the tip of the scope to the objective lens. Okay, ours is right here. If this wasn't a sleeve, but if it had a lens that looked up right here, the tip length of this would be the distance from the tip to essentially right there, right? Because the lens is set back from the end a little bit. Okay. So tip length reduces your working length just a hair, but that's kind of an unimportant detail. But you do want to know what the tip length is. Well, if all the ones that we have that are articulated, it's called articulated, are 0 degrees. So they have a 0 tip length. You can get versions that where the lens would be on the side of the tip. And so the tip length would be however far down that is. Now, with like this one, actually I'm gonna power this up. This one, the video scope, actually I should have moved it without it. When you're using it, you will notice it is easier to move. See how it's only moving that far right now? And then once it booted up, it moved further. This has like power steering in it. So it only moves a little bit when it's off. When you turn on, you can actually, if you listen quietly, there's little assist motors in there. They're inside this control head, and then there's little cables that run down. So inside of here, there are wires going to the light. There's wires coming from the camera, and there's 4 tiny little cables that move this thing around, all inside of this little narrow diameter sheath. But now, what is the angle of view of this scope? I'm going to turn the light off so I don't keep blinding myself. What's the angle of view of this one? What about now? It's still 0. The angle of view is 0 all the time. The angle of view doesn't change. What it is it has articulation. Okay, the articulation is about, I want to say it's about 60 degrees. Okay, that's how far it can bend. So articulation is different from angle of view. Angle of view is still, the center line of the little camera at the end is still 0 no matter which way you articulate it, right? What's that? No, we have some scopes where the objective lens is 90 degrees. It's on the side. They don't have a sleeve. They're just built that way. That's the only one we have that has a sleeve like that. That just makes it more versatile. Again, the sleeve, though, does increase the diameter, so you may not be able to fit it in the same places you would otherwise. Kind of like this, if you run it through one of these tubes, right? This will fit into a narrower opening than the tube will. So, okay, I'll leave that on. Okay. Next segment we've got is looking at kind of what's inside of these. So I talked about here's our light source with a fiber optic cable that comes down to the end. This is very, very similar to the borescope I've got here. And then in this case, here's a 90 degree. This is a 90 degree angle of view scope. Field of view is probably, what is that, about 60 degrees or so, maybe 45 to 60. But then it's got relay lenses or prisms along the length of it that bring the image from the objective lens all the way back to the eyepiece here, okay? The adjustable eyepiece, that's a focus ring. So when you're looking through this, this has a focus ring here. The fiber scope has a focus ring right here, okay? You may need to adjust that to match your eye. Actually, no one in this class wears glasses. Yesterday, a bunch of people had glasses. Sometimes it may have enough adjustment depending on what kind of glasses someone wears. They might be able to use it without glasses and adjust it. If you do wear glasses, you do. And that's why I was saying I'm not going to require you necessarily to wear safety glasses while you're trying to use these because looking through an eyepiece with a safety glass just sometimes doesn't work very well. So you got the eyepiece with a focal ring or an adjustable piece there. Here's what's inside that fiber scope. So this one they show as a 4-way articulated. They do make 4-way articulated fiber scopes. But again, you've got that fiber optic bundle that carries light out to the tip, and you've got the image bundle, they call it an image guide, that brings light up to the eyepiece. There's a focus ring, and the diopter ring is what holds the eyepiece. There. Here's what's inside of a video scope, like the one sitting here. And I don't show the whole thing. This is just the working end of it. So the actual cable end up to about this point here. And so this is where I was talking about. You see 4-way articulation cables plus fiber optic lighting cables plus video cables all in there. Okay. In this one right here, the example they're showing here, it uses a fiber optic bundle to bring light to the tip. Ours has the LEDs built into the tip. So it's got wires to run all that stuff running through there. And then it's got the articulated neck, what's called the camera head at the tip. Our camera head is the silver part on the very end. That's your camera head on the end there. So, and the LED lights surrounding it, we saw that. We saw those working there. If we're using these, when we're looking in our part, do you think we can take measurements? Say you need to measure a crack in a blade, in a compressor blade or a turbine blade. How do you think we measure? How do you think we would take a measurement? Yeah. Yeah, you find a crack in a turbine blade. What do we have to do to figure out, if it's above or below limits? So we got to take the engine off and take it apart. Usually you got to pull the engine off and then separate it. Yeah. Might be able to match the scale, like so you know how wide the blade is. You might be able to do that. Okay. How accurate do you think you can get there? 10%, something like that. Okay, let's look at something here. So we've seen we have the ability to measure. We've looked at how the different scopes operate. Now let's look at some of the different terms for them. So this is, I was talking about all these scopes here have the same field of view. They're all a 55-degree field of view scope. What's different on these is the angle of view. So we have what's called a bottoming scope. That's what all three of the ones I've got here are. A right angle scope. When we put the sleeve on there, the borescope becomes essentially a right angle scope, 90 degrees up. Forward oblique is looking out towards the end. Retrospective, where would a retrospective scope be handy? That's kind of looking back. Anyone think of an application for something like that? Exactly. You go in through the spark plug hole and you can look back up towards your valves. Yeah. And you might be able to go in and look back at a blade or something like that as well, in like a turbine case or something like that. So, having those different angles can be handy, and that's where the sleeved one makes the scope a little more universal. Or, like I showed with the fiber and video scope, you put it through a curved piece of tube and are able to look back at an oblique. Some of the newer ones of these two, the articulation on this one isn't quite 90 degrees. Some of the newest scopes I've seen, they can articulate 180 degrees. So they can actually look back towards themselves. They've gotten better at the articulation as well. Okay. You don't see the circumferential or circumference scopes too often anymore. These ones, what would happen with this one? What would you see? So your light comes up here and then bounces off a circumferential mirror. What do you think you would have with something like that? Yeah, it's basically a donut shape. You've got a dead spot in the center. Okay. So it's an old design before when they had to use mirrors versus anything nowadays uses lenses or prisms. And so they're more of a bottoming style scope rather than these circumferential ones. I guess they they might still have an application somewhere. I'm just not sure what it is. Okay. Here's the magnification we talked about. When asked about do the scopes magnify, do they not? And what I said is they do both. And so this is getting into, as we're using these, view info, you got to keep in mind that the scopes oftentimes are going to distort your view of things. And so those would be, what kind of if you see a distorted view, what kind of an indication would that be? From our discussion of indications earlier. Is it false or is it? False is usually error. Is it an error? It's more of an attribute of the scope. The middle one. What was the middle? What? It's a non-relevant, right? It'd be some kind of a non-relevant indication because of your scope. And you got to understand the limits of your scope. So what we've got here is with our scope, they're saying a focal point. So every scope, every lens has a focal point. In the case of this one, the focal point is 2 inches in front of the lens. Okay. So objects that are 2 inches in front of the lens will look proper size. They'll look accurate. Okay. That means anything closer than 2 inches there'll be a magnifying effect. Okay. If it's 1 inch, it's going to double it. Okay. If it's a half an inch from the tip, it's going to be 4 times its size. You can see it's an exponential scale as you get closer. The closer you get, the bigger it appears. If you move away, each time you double the distance, so go from 2 inches to 4 inches, it's going to do a negative or a fractional magnification. So it's going to make it look smaller than what it actually is. Okay? So at 4 inches, it would be a half an inch. Something that would be, or half of the size you would expect it to be. Okay? A multiplier of a half. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind as you're using these is it will distort something. We'll see how that works in a bit. I went through the terms when we had the pictures up here. So just objective distance, that's how far it is from that objective lens to your object. That's what we were looking at here. These are objective distances of 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches. Okay. The objective lens, that's the lens closest to the object you're looking at. The overall length, that's end tip to the end of the eyepiece. Relay lenses could also be relay prisms or relay mirrors that are moving the image from one end of a borescope to the other. The resolution, the ability of an optical system to distinguish individual points. Okay. What do you think is the limit of resolution for a borescope like this that's all lens and prism based? What ultimately is going to be determining what we can see? Your eyes, okay? Because this is taking the full image. There's no resolution difference. What about the video scope? The camera capability. The camera is going to have a certain definition level, right? You're all familiar with high def, 1080, 4K, right? Or yeah. I believe this one's 640 by 480. I can't remember off the top of my head. I have to look it up. Okay, that's what the camera can pick up. The camera actually is a higher resolution than the display on here, by the way. So if you take a picture with the camera, it's going to be more clear than what you see on this display. This is not a great display. It's an early flat panel display. The same what? They're a little bit higher resolution than what you'll see here. Not much. They're not much. They're 640 by 480. You know, you're not going to, if you put them on a high def television, they're going to look like crap, right? You put them into your report, you know, about that big, they look good enough that you can tell what's going on, right? If it's not a great picture, you might have to move the camera closer. You might have to move the camera tip closer to get a better image. That's how you improve your image for a given resolution. The fiber scope, when you come up here, I want you to look in it. This has a resolution. What's going to affect the resolution is the fiber optic bundles. When you look through this, it's not a single image like you see in the borescope. You see what looks like a honeycomb. And that's because the image is not transmitted by a single fiber optic fiber. It is a whole bundle of them. So each fiber is like a pixel in the image. So when you look through this, kind of mention that. And I mentioned too that on this one, there are a few dead pixels in there, or a few broken fibers that there's black spots in the image. Like when you get a monitor, you buy a monitor and it's got a dead pixel right in the middle and it annoys the heck out of you. Anyone that games probably knows what I'm talking about. So resolution is that. It can be determined by, you know, the camera resolution. It can be determined by your eye if it's something that uses lenses and relays. Rigid borescope, we showed you what that is. The sheathing is the covering. Here's the sheathing on the borescope. The borescope sheathing is the metal tube. You have flexible sheathing on the video scope and the fiber scope. Visual acuity, that is how well you can see. You have 20/20 vision, you have 20/10 vision, you have 20/30 vision. Part of when you become qualified for performing NDT, you have to take an eye test as part of it. And it doesn't necessarily have to, it can be corrected as long as you can use your glasses with whatever the device is using. And that applies to every NDT method. Right? You got to be able to see well enough to be able to interpret what's going on. So can you see the detail you need to be able to see? Depth of focus. So we mentioned there's a focal point. Where is the image in focus and where is it one-to-one? Some lenses are set up and the optical systems are set up in a way where the only stuff in focus is what's right at that focal point. Others have what's called a wide depth of field, and that is you'll have things in focus in front of and behind that. But the downside of a wide depth of field is it's going to make everything look like it's real close together. It kind of smashes that all because it's all in focus at various distances. Okay, so depth of field or depth of focus, if you're familiar with photography and that kind of thing. Diopter correction, that's kind of the focal ring. The eyepiece, that's what you look through. Fiber optics, we talked about that. Now, fiber optics can come in two types. They can be a coherent or a random array. If you have image transmission, it must be a coherent array. And what that means is a coherent array means that if these are the two ends of your fiber bundle, it means that this one goes here. They're all coherent array is they're all parallel to each other. You know, and this fiber the top fiber is going to transmit a little bit of the image. This one's going to transmit a little. This is going to transmit. You want them all to be in the same orientation at the other end, right? A random array, it used to be cheap fiber optic cables. They didn't worry about keeping them aligned like that. And so you'd have a random array where maybe this cable ended up here and this fiber optic ended up here, and this one ended up here, and that one ended up there, and this one ended up here. You can imagine if you're trying to transmit an image when it goes from here, from the left to the right, by the time the image gets over here, it's all scrambled. You're not going to have a legible image. But if all you're trying to do is transmit light, from the light source up to the tip of the scope, a random array would work fine. Now, you rarely see random array fiber optic anymore because it really doesn't cost that much more. It's so negligible to make a coherent array that nowadays they just manufacture, coherent arrays are more useful than random arrays. They don't really cost any more today, but back in the day, they were more expensive to make. So they both exist there. Flexible borescope, we showed what that was. Focusing, changing the focal distance so you can see it. Image, so on the video scope and on the fiber scope, you are looking at an image. You're not looking at the actual object itself, right? You're looking at a presentation of it that is somewhere else. Actually, on all three of them, you're looking at an image when you're viewing it. You're not directly viewing the object, okay? And then magnification, we know what magnification is, whether it's bigger or smaller. It appears bigger or smaller than it actually is. So the process when we do this, I've got a couple examples. Here is an engine, a GE CF6. What section of the engine are we looking at? Who can tell me? Compressor. Why do you say compressor? You got your variable stator vanes. You guys got this. Yes, the Tuesday class was a little, I think they were still getting into the fact that we're back in school. It took them a little while. Okay, you take some time, that's okay. Yeah, everyone picks it up at different speeds. Okay, here's what the manual section looks like: compressor section, borescope, ports, and viewing area. So this would be from an NDT manual. It would tell you how to look at the different sections. So it is a 14-stage compressor, and it tells you how to find the different areas. I'm going to go to this where I put them side by side, so it's a little easier to see. So if I want to look at the 7th stage compressor, for instance, you've got the leading edge, the trailing edge of each blade. So 7th stage of the compressor, it's really hard to follow. I'm just going to go 2. It's easier for me to follow. So if I want to look at the leading edge, I'd go through B1-1. Well, B1-1 is what's called a borescope plug. It's just there's a boss with a little plug in it that's designed to be removed to do inspections. So we compared this to our engine. You can see kind of this frame that's part of the variable guide vane system, right, is right here. And you can see the different rings. So it's just below that. They're hard to see on this image, but it is, let me think, it is kind of buried right in this area down here, okay? So it's a roadmap to tell you where you go. Now, for areas where there isn't some kind of other access, they put in dedicated borescope plugs. But like when you get back here, you can see B1-7, which you use. B1-7 allows you to see the 8th or 9th stage. It's really weird. 7th. So rather than, there's already a bleed duct that hooks up there. Rather than putting a dedicated port there, all you do is disconnect this bleed duct. If we look at that bleed duct, it is, let me orient myself here. It is this right here. You disconnect that bleed duct and you stick your camera in through that bleed port. Right? So it can be dedicated ports like we've got here. It can be bleed ducts where different bleed ducts hook up, like one right there, right? It can be this one here. There's this big one here, which is just kind of off the top. Our engine's like rotated differently, so it's hard to see that one. Actually, yeah, it's up top. You can't see it. But you have those as ways to get in there. Okay, further back in the engine, or in this case, this is an APU. If we're looking at the combustor, here is kind of the combustion section. Here's the cutaway of it. What port are we going in right now? Here's our combustion liner. Here's our stage 1 nozzle. So what part of the engine is this over here? What's the nozzle part of? Oh. What's right after the combustion chamber? Turbine, right? It's the turbine inlet nozzle or inlet guide vane. Okay, so we've got our combustion chamber, our liner, Okay. So where is this borescope? What's it being inserted through right now? What do you think? The what? It's an igniter hole. Okay. What's this thing right here? That's our fuel nozzle. Right. And then you got your igniter would be stuck in right here. We take the igniter out. We bring our borescope in. Now we can inspect our combustion liner. We can also look back and see the leading edge of the stage one nozzle. That's one of the most stressed areas of the engine, right? You got all the hot combustion gases. This is straightening out their flow before they go into the first stage of the turbine. Okay, so we can inspect combustion liner. We can bring it out to this point here and maybe look at the case if we need to see the inside of the case or the outside of the liner. We can point it back this way to see the turbine nozzle. We may even, with a flexible scope, we might even be able to bring it in, articulate it over, and actually go in and inspect the turbine, first turbine stage, right? So, and this shows various other areas. So there's the igniter port we were just looking at, right there, right? There's different places to inspect. This just has a single or dual stage centrifugal compressor, so there's only a couple places to inspect it. This is kind of flipped around, the other igniter port on the opposite side, compressor case. This has a borescope plug on the compressor case, a dedicated plug. Okay. Mainframe 1 o'clock, right there. Compressor forward part. The other thing they've got here is they've removed maybe a starter or a generator on here. If we're looking at like blades, oftentimes we want to be able to turn the engine, right? Is there a way from the outside normally to turn the N2 stage, the high pressure stage? No? How do you turn it from the outside? How about you remove the starter and turn where the starter hooks up? You know, your low pressure stage, you can grab the fan oftentimes and turn that, right? But if you're trying to turn the high pressure turbine or the high pressure compressor, oftentimes you put a wrench into either some engines actually have a spot where you can put a wrench right on a thing on the gearbox to turn the stage. Others you remove like the starter and drive the starter, you know, it fits into the starter spline and you're able to spin it that way. There's what the engine looks like. There they are side by side. So, you know, here are your fuel nozzles. Here's your igniter port right here. You go in through that. That's what they're showing there. Okay. There's a plug here just on this side. You can't really see it because of it might be that plug actually right there. But here's your compressor to be able to get in to see the compressor. Okay. So when we're doing this though, we have to keep in mind that we may, you know, our mind can play tricks on us. Hey, we saw that already, or the equipment can play tricks on us. We saw the magnification issue with, you know, depending on whether objects are closer or further away than the focal point, right? Objects that are closer. If an object's closer than the focal point, what's going to happen to, how's it going to look? It's going to look bigger than it or smaller than it actually is. It's going to look larger. If it's further away than the focal point, is it going to be larger or smaller than it actually is? Smaller, right? Okay. Objects in the air are closer than they appear. The objects in your mirror look smaller than they actually are. Your mirror is not perfectly flat on your car. It has a focal point. Most cars coming up behind you are further away than the focal point, so it makes them look smaller. That's why they look like they're closer than they, you know, are closer than they appear. That's why you don't use mirrors. They're always lying. No, it's playing a trick on you. It's not a lie. It's just a little trick, right? Little practical joke. Right up till the point it smashes into your rear bumper. Because you're out on Helmer Road trying to turn left into the college and there's no turn lane. No? When you guys are waiting to turn left into the college, you don't sit there and watch your mirror and ready to gun it in case somebody's not paying attention? I sure am. Okay, good for you. I like my neck muscles functional and able to, you know, not being in pain all the time. So here, we got two guys looking at something. What is it? Is it a 6 or is it a 9? It depends on perspective, okay? How about this right here? What do you see here? What do you see? You see a cup? Two faces. They're getting ready to have a passionate kiss at the end of some love movie, right? Some rom-com, right? It's kind of both. You got the optimist and the pessimist, right? They look at it two different ways. So other things we have to be aware of: light. Is there enough or not enough, right? I showed you can adjust the light level on all the scopes, and that's so that you don't get the big thing is flashback. You're inside of metal objects. Metal objects tend to be shiny. That light reflects. It can blind you. Or if you're going into like a combustion chamber, it's a fairly open area. You may need to turn your light up to kind of light a bigger area or a bigger volume. If you do get flashback and are temporarily blinded, it's good to take a break for a few minutes. Let the black spots subside so you don't potentially miss something by the fact that your eyes are, you can't see. Color can throw things off. When you look inside of an engine, most of it's metal. It's various shades of gray. Black, some older video scopes tended to be black and white. This one's color, I think. Yeah. But there are some black and white, or some would take color pictures, but they'd be black and white displays. But inside of an engine, inside of structure, everything. What color is everything inside of a structure? Say you're looking at wing structure. What color is it all? The what? Primer green. Lots of primer green, right? So, that can kind of play tricks on you, shadows and that kind of thing. And then geometry, curves, angles, holes, overlaps, and layers can be distorted by the magnification issues. Yeah. Most of them it's automatic, because they're a digital camera. It might, like this one does have the ability, if I go into the menu, um, I can change like white balance, right? I don't know if you can go in and adjust. I never really tried. Print screen, memory, date, time, sound. Yeah, this one doesn't really have the ability to change. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some that you can. Um, Crap. I'll have to play with that in a minute. Yeah. Well, it's changing the processing of the signal. You might be able to do that. So some of them probably do have that ability. You can also get, I mean, there are borescopes that operate in different ranges. There are infrared borescopes. They're expensive, but they have them. Uh, there's borescopes that have a black light instead of a white light at the tip. If you're looking for like liquid penetrant that's fluorescent or a magnetic particle that's fluorescent. So you can have that kind of stuff too. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them do have the ability to change like exposure, f-stop, that kind of thing. But you know, other things, orientation. That was the two people looking at, is it a 6 or a 9? What angle? And with the scope, let me get out of this menu real quick. Oh, that's not what I want to do. Go all the way back. With the scopes, know that the screen or the lens and the tip of the scope are not always in the same orientation. There we go. I'm working on this upside down, trying to get out of it because I wanted to show you something. That is not what I wanted to do. There we go. So, this is what I'm talking about where with orientation, right? Right now you are upright, right? Now you are upside down, right? Your scope can get turned. So sometimes trying to figure out what's up and down can be a little bit tricky. You got to learn like how to orient yourself in the scope as you go through. Maybe look for context clues, other components that are on a certain part of the engine or features or things like that. Expectations, are you familiar with what you're looking at? Or complacency. Have you looked at the same thing over and over? You never find anything. You're like, I won't find anything. Right? Equipment issues, focus, quality of lenses, optics. A couple of years ago, some students borrowed the video scope for overhaul class to try to find, I can't remember exactly what they dropped, but something they dropped in the bottom of their overhaul engine into the oil pan at the bottom. And they dunked the tip of the scope into the oil when they were looking for it. And we had, there's a protective cover over the lens. There was a thin film of oil between the protective cover and the lens for about 6 months after that. I kept having to like soak it in alcohol to try to dissolve it out of there. Seems to be better now, I've noticed, but it had a kind of a gold tint to it for a while. So, you know, be aware of equipment issues and that kind of thing. If you were doing like a combustor inspection and, you know, that gold tint could kind of look like a burning or an overheating possibly, right? So here's a few things for you to look at and see if you can figure them out. So here, which one is different, or which one's they're all different? The other one says they're all different. Okay. A, B, and C are the same. D is different. Okay, you're just looking at it from different perspectives. It kind of, if you look at kind of the shaded side, it goes right, down, kind of out and back right, comes right, down, comes out and back right. B is, let me think how it goes right, down, out, and back right. D is out, or is left, down, over, and down. I actually give a test with this kind of stuff to all the basic engines classes now. It's a mechanical aptitude test. Because what it allows me to do is make the groups fairly even in abilities. Some people are stronger at this kind of stuff, some people are stronger at other things. And that way I can kind of match up abilities rather than having, I think with your class, I had some really strong groups and some others that didn't have as much mechanical experience and they got way ahead and way behind. So, but D is our one that's different. Okay, how about here? Are these all the same? If not, what's longest to shortest? Okay, so we got some all the sames, we got some various different ones. Okay, I'm gonna tell you right now, they're not all the same, but they're not all different. So if I ask you which one's the longest, which one would you say is the longest? D? F? A? Here's B. B is longer than that, longer than that, longer than that, longer than that, longer than that. B is the longest. It looks very short because your mind divides it into two pieces. Okay, the order is C, which is attached to it. I'm going from the base of the plug here. See, C, shorter, a little bit shorter, a little bit shorter, a little bit shorter. C. So C is the shortest. Okay. A is next. Then D, E, and F are equal. And B is the longest. Okay. So, you know, you can imagine that trying to just do that eyeball is tough. Here's our next one. So this is showing that, you know, things that are closer than the focal point are magnified, things that are further away are squashed together. So this would be, if you had, this is a combustion liner, if you looked at the outside of it, remember the combustion liners we did in basic engines? They were kind of segmented, often they're segmented and kind of welded together. So this one, you can see the segments are relatively equal. There's a little bit of difference, but not a lot, right? And they've got circular holes in them. If we stick a borescope in, you'll say there's an igniter hole over here. And now we're looking at it here. You can see as you go further and further away, what you would see in the borescope is something that looks like this. You know, the further you get away, the closer or the narrower and narrower each segment looks. The other thing is we've got a light source here. It's going to be brightest close up, and it starts to get in shadow further away. And then the last thing to kind of point out is you can see in the second segment is where the holes are. You can see they look oval or oblong because of that magnification in one direction, not the other. Okay. So that's something to kind of keep in mind when you're doing your inspections is the perception can be thrown off by that magnification taking place, negative or positive magnification. The last item of, what do you see here? Big boulder. You getting upside down reflection? Doesn't look like a floating boulder to anyone? Kind of looks like a floating boulder until you flip it upright and you see that this, right? So that's that perception. And it looks like a floating boulder until you notice that it's upside down. Those are the trees being reflected. Same picture. I promise it's the exact same picture. I just rotated 180 degrees. You don't know? You got your doubts? Floating boulder? Boulder in a muddy lake. Huh? I literally pasted the same picture and just rotated it 180 degrees. Right. Yeah. So yeah, did someone Photoshop in a floating rock? No, they just flipped the picture upside down. So again, orientation can affect your perception. You got to keep that in mind when you're actually doing an inspection, right? Is your mind, are your eyes, is the equipment playing a trick on you? And what does that mean for your inspection? Are you seeing what you expect to see? Are you seeing something that shouldn't be there? Okay. Are you missing something that is there that shouldn't be?